Hello, dear listeners. I'm so excited to each week be bringing you thoughts, breakdowns, and comparisons for novels and their film or TV adaptations. I'm Tracey, I'll be your host, and this is a Novel Take podcast. Happy Friday, listeners. Thank you so much for joining me on this exciting adventure. I thought I'd start this very first episode of A Novel Take with a little bit of a background about me. Why am I starting a podcast? Well, I've had this idea for a couple of months now, and I'm currently in week 9 of unemployment. So, aside from my mandatory looking for jobs so I can get my universal credit, I have a lot of time on my hands, and what better way to make the most of this time? I love books. I always have, and I don't ever recall a time in my life that I didn't have books around me. And to be honest, there were maybe a couple of years after high school where I didn't read, but overall, I've always had books in my life. Something that those who know me well will tell you is I don't have regrets. I feel until they invent time machines, there's nothing you can do to change things. So why waste time on regrets? What's the point? However, my biggest book regret is taking a bunch of books from when I was a kid to Cashies and getting I can't even remember how much, maybe about $20 for them. And since then, and that regret, I've never thrown away any books unless it was truly awful. I moved from Australia to London about 6 years ago and have 14 boxes of my books in a storage unit back in Oz. And every day I think about how much it will cost to get them sent over. Hashtag I miss my books. My dad, Chris, has the most magical range of novels going back at least 40 to 50 years or more. Sorry for aging you there, Dad. And browsing those shelves with the double stacked paperbacks of Anne McCaffrey, Stephen King, Robert Jordan, Arthur C. Clarke, Robin Hobb, Raymond Feist, Terry Goodkind, and many more whiled away so much of the time during my formative years. So I grew up the middle child of 3 girls, and for someone who is very much introverted and have always taken solace in reading and imagining myself in the very places I'm reading about, books are wondrous things that take us out of ourselves for a while and into so many adventures. I've been to Narnia, Hogwarts, Wonderland, Basgiath, the Greek islands, the south of France, space even, other planets, galaxies, universes, and just so many magical places. And I've lived so many lives, all thanks to books. My favorite ever memory of Christmas was when I was 10 and I received a lot of books that year. Around the World in 80 Days, The Hobbit, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the unabridged version of Jane Eyre, and a 6-book box set that included The Wind in the Willows and Peter Pan. And I cannot, for shame, remember the last 4 books in that box set, but I still have them, and they are in a box in a storage unit in Australia. And I remember before bed each night, my dad and I would sit and I would read aloud a chapter of The Hobbit. And that's how I got through reading such an epic fantasy at the age of 10. And when I was older, I stole his version of the Silmarillion. Apologies, Dad. I don't think I gave it back to you, but if you want it, it's in a box in that storage unit. So sorry. As I said, I love books and I get excited when a favorite of mine gets turned into a TV show or film. Sometimes they get it right and sometimes they don't. So, my goal with this podcast is to break these down and find out exactly what went right or wrong. I'm very much aware that it's just not possible to get everything from a novel into a visual medium, and it's very widely known that you just shouldn't try and compare the two. But I'm going to go ahead and give it a red hot go anyway. And as someone who enjoys reading, I do try and ensure that I've read the novel first because there's always something missing in the adaptations. For example, in the Harry Potter films, they left out Ginny Weasley's entire personality. And I'm hoping that they fix that in the TV series. Also, Peeves. Peeves the Poltergeist, absolute legend of the books. Hashtag justice for Peeves. You, dear listener, do not need to have both read the novels and watched the TV show or film. That's my job. However, it would be beneficial to have done at least one of those, but it's not 100% necessary. I just hope you enjoy this podcast. I am an Aussie Brit half breed. So, first off, Umbridge would hate me. But just let you know, there will most likely be swearing at some point. There will most likely be adult content discussed, depending on what books we're discussing. And also, there may be spoilers. You have been warned. Now, let's take a quick break, and I'll be back with the summary. I'm going to kick off this podcast with one of my all time favorite series, and that is Harry Potter. To start with, I understand this is difficult for some members of the community due to the controversial stance of the author has taken on trans issues. I want to emphatically state that I do not agree with the author and her views. I believe we should all have the chance to live life in our true selves. This series of episodes covering Harry Potter, for me, is to celebrate the world that in my darkest time has always been there for me. I've gone through periods in my life where I have been alone, I felt forgotten, and struggled with mental health. But I know the wizarding world is a place I can go to, and I will be cheered with some sass from Harry, some boss bitch from Ginny, and definitely laughs from the Weasley twins. The fun times I've had and the people I have met online and in person, thanks to the Harry Potter series, are the light in my heart that I choose to carry with me. When I think about the author and her views, I remember the scene in the Half Blood Prince movie in the courtyard after Dumbledore has died, and everyone raises their wands and the dark mark slowly dissipates. Whatever your beliefs, this podcast is a safe space for everyone who loves Harry Potter to come together and show the naysayers happiness can be found even in the darkest of times if one only remembers to turn on the light. So, I hope you're still with me. Let's get into it. This episode is covering chapters 1 to 3 of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. The chapter names are The Boy Who Lived, The Vanishing Glass, and The Letters from No One. As I am from Australia and now live in the UK, I will be referring to it as Philosopher's Stone and not Sorcerer's Stone. It was written by She Who Must Not Be Named and was first published in the UK on the 26th of June, 1997 by Bloomsbury, and in the US the following year by Scholastic Corporation. The film is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, written by She Who Must Not Be Named and Steve Kloves, and was released in London on the 14th of November 2001 by Warner Brothers. I was first introduced to Harry Potter by a friend who had been at uni, and a friend of his had told him about the book, and he thought that I would enjoy it. And, well, boy, was he right. I think the first three books had been released already at the time. So this was late 1999, early 2000. So I've been in this fandom for about 25 years now, which is just mind boggling. Let's begin with the opening chapter, The Boy Who Lived, and the opening scenes of the film. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. The Boy Who Lived opens with background about the Dursleys. Their descriptions. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large moustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, and a small son named Dudley. It tells briefly about the Potters, and Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended that she didn't have a sister. This gives us a brief hint into what's coming. When we're following Mr. Dursley as he goes about his day, he notices a cat reading a map and a lot of strangely dressed people. He overhears people talking about the Potters and their son Harry and wonders if it could be the Potters that he is related to. He's called a muggle and is hugged by a tiny old man wearing a violet cloak. He then goes home, and on the nightly news, it's mentioned there have been hundreds of sightings of owls and a downpour of shooting stars. When Mrs. Dursley brings in 2 cups of tea, Mr. Dursley asks about her sister, and Mrs. Dursley immediately shuts him down. She's sharp and snaps at him and sips her tea through pursed lips. I think not including this part of the chapter in the film is a great loss. This is the buy in, right? It gets us thinking about what's going on. It shows us the reactions the Dursleys have to anything out of the ordinary, to the Potters, and not including it, I think, is a consequence of making a book into a film perhaps before the series has been completed. Looking back on this scene during each movie and knowing this is partly why the Dursleys treat Harry the way they do makes a little bit more sense. In the movie, it opens with an owl perched on the sign for Privet Drive, and Dumbledore emerges from the woods and uses the put outer on 5 streetlights, which does nothing to dim the light at all. And he chats briefly to McGonagall before Hagrid arrives. In the book, this interaction between Dumbledore and McGonagall is so much longer and it sets up their relationship. It shows a bit of their personalities, McGonagall's caring, concern, worry, and Dumbledore's eccentricities. And there's hints here of him knowing more than what he's saying already. He does say, I have never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name. To which McGonagall responds, I know you haven't. Everyone knows you're the only one you know who, oh, all right, Voldemort, was frightened of. Lily and James are first mentioned by name, and Dumbledore confirms they are dead. He also confirms Harry couldn't be killed by Voldemort, that Voldemort's power broke, and that's why he's gone. I feel like this is all essential information, and feel like if I had just watched the movie without reading the book first, I'd have so many questions and feel like I'd be scrambling to catch up. Can someone who watched the film first please comment and let us know what you felt? Did you feel confused, or was it easy to pick up details as you watched the movie? Next, in both the book and the movie, Hagrid arrives on a huge motorbike that fell out of the air. In the book, Hagrid is asked where he got the motorbike and says, Young Sirius Black lent it me. He says he has him and that the house was almost destroyed. As a reader, I'm so intrigued. What happened to the house? How did Harry survive? How did Lily and James die? All questions I'm sure you'd have watching the movie, but is the drama there as much? Is it as much of a gut punch? We have the first mention of Harry's scar, a curiously shaped cut like a bolt of lightning. Hagrid is emotional about leaving Harry, and Dumbledore takes Harry to the doorstep, places him down, and tucks a letter inside Harry's blankets. Good luck, Harry, he murmured. And the closing paragraph sets up things for the coming chapters and books ahead, so please indulge me as I quote the entire thing. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky sky, the very last place you would expect astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him, and he slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours' time by Mrs. Dursley's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dudley. He couldn't know that at this very moment, people meeting in secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and saying in hushed voices, To Harry Potter, the boy who lived. The movie ends this scene by zooming in on the lightning bolt scar, which transitions into the movie title and out again onto the scar on Harry's head 10 years later at 4 minutes 5 seconds. Chapter 2 is The Vanishing Glass and is probably the first really altered scene, not just shortened when compared to the movie. It starts 10 years after Harry was left on the Dursleys' front step, and we're told the living room was, quote, almost exactly the same as it had been on the night when Mr. Dursley had seen that fateful news report about the owls. Only the photographs on the mantelpiece really showed how much time had passed. And the room held no sign at all that another boy lived in the house too. But Harry is there, in the cupboard under the stairs, and he is woken by Aunt Petunia, Mrs. Dursley. This scene in the movie is perfectly taken right from the book. Aunt Petunia bangs on the cupboard door for Harry to wake up and finish the breakfast. She unlocks the door. In the book, Harry had a dream and that there had been a flying motorbike in it. He thinks he's had the same dream before. Now, as readers, we know this is likely Harry's memory from when Hagrid delivered him on Sirius's bike. It's Dudley's birthday, and he excitedly runs down the stairs, jumping as he goes over Harry's cupboard space, saying, "Wake up, cousin! We're going to the zoo!" And he pushes Harry back into the cupboard as Harry's coming out. The kitchen table is almost hidden beneath all Dudley's birthday presents. And in the book, Dudley looks to have got some items that he wanted: a new computer, a second television, a racing bike. In this scene in the movie, I can see the bike. Also, Aunt Petunia tells Harry, try not to burn anything. But the bacon is cooked and all Harry does is serve it. It's a small detail, but every time I watch this movie, I hate it. And I would have liked something different, perhaps from Aunt Petunia, like maybe try not to spill anything or try not to drop anything. Harry describes Dudley as very fat and hated exercise, unless, of course, it involved punching somebody. And Dudley looked a lot like Uncle Vernon. He had a large face, not much neck, small, watery blue eyes, and thick blonde hair that lay smoothly on his thick, fat head, which is the opposite of how Harry describes himself. Small and skinny for his age, thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and bright green eyes. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of sellotape. And the only thing Harry liked about his own appearance was a very thin scar on his forehead, which was shaped like a bolt of lightning. This is where movie Harry and movie Dudley are different from book Harry and book Dudley. In the movie, Harry not only has blue eyes, which we know is because Daniel Radcliffe couldn't wear coloured contacts, but he also doesn't have black hair. It's brown. If they can subject Tom Felton to bleaching his hair to play Draco, they could have dyed Daniel's black, right? Is there a reason they didn't? Does anyone know? Can you please comment? Also, Dudley doesn't have blonde hair, and neither does Aunt Petunia for that matter, like in the book. Harry talks about Uncle Vernon, Mr. Dursley, shouting that Harry needed a haircut, which we'll come back to shortly. Harry puts the eggs and bacon on the table as Dudley counts the number of presents he's got. There's 36, which is two less than last year. But then Aunt Petunia points out the present from Aunt Marge, which brings the total to 37. And we'll buy you another two presents while we're out today. In the book, we have the first mention of Mrs. Fig when Aunt Petunia tells Uncle Vernon Mrs. Fig has broken her leg and can't take Harry. Mrs. Fig lives 2 streets away and her house smells like cabbages, and she makes him look at photographs of her cats. While they try and come up with a solution of who can look after Harry, Dudley starts crying, saying he doesn't want Harry to come. Here is a section of the movie that differs from the book. In the books, Dudley's best friend Piers Polkiss arrives, and Harry, not believing his luck, is sitting in the back seat of the car on the way to the zoo with the Dursleys and Piers. As in the book, in the movie, Uncle Vernon warns Harry, any funny business, anything at all, and you'll be in that cupboard from now until Christmas. And here's where we get our first glimpse that Harry might have some magical abilities. He remembers how Aunt Petunia once shaved his whole head herself because she was, quote, tired of Harry coming back from the barber's looking as though he hadn't been at all. Harry spent a sleepless night imagining school the next day where he was already teased, and when he got up, his hair was exactly the same as it had been before Aunt Petunia had sheared it off. Another time, Aunt Petunia tried to force a revolting old jumper of Dudley's on him, but whenever she tried to pull it over his head, the jumper shrank until it would have fit a glove poppet. And another time, he was found on the school kitchen roof after being chased by Dudley and his friends. And he jumped behind the dustbins, but found himself on the roof, putting it down to the wind catching him as he jumped. These little bits of detail show that there is definitely something unique about Harry compared to the Dursleys and others. I don't know how it would have been done, and maybe that's why they were left out of the movie, but I would have loved to see that these things were happening to Harry in the movie. After all, in Half Blood Prince, we will see a young Tom Riddle able to use magic, and there is a lot of comparison between obviously Harry and Tom Riddle and their abilities. Also, if these things are happening to Harry and we as readers know it's magic, is it because he's not consciously using magic that the ministry don't come after him for using underage magic? Does that tracking not kick in until you're at Hogwarts? The ministry had to have known where Harry was, possibly the only wizard for miles. Did Dumbledore give Mrs. Fig something that aided in concealing Harry, or does the blood magic have something to do with it? Or is it just a plot hole? Let me know your thoughts. So Harry and Co are at the zoo, and after lunch they head to the reptile house. Here it is mostly the same as in the movie. There's not much mention of Piers, so I can see why he was left out of the movie. In the movie, it cuts from them getting in the car at Privet Drive to the reptile house at the zoo. In the book, Dudley's looking at a snake that's not moving and he gets bored. As he walks away, Harry moves to look at the snake and feels sorry for it. The snake raises its head and winks at him. So, looking back, we know Harry is using Parseltongue, but is he unknowingly using occlumency with the snake? Harry doesn't speak before the snake winks at him, so how does the snake know he's there? I think a great addition to the movie would have been if faintly in the background we hear a hissing, which would show Harry is actually talking Parseltongue. And it would be a fun thing to notice on a rewatch that maybe you don't pick up on the first time. The conversation between Harry and the snake is mostly the same for the book and movie, but it's Piers who shouts about the snake to Dudley and Uncle Vernon. Dudley, Mr. Dursley, come look at this snake. You won't believe what it's doing. Dudley comes along and pushes Harry onto the floor, and then, quote, what came next happened so fast no one saw how it happened. 1 second, Piers and Dudley were leaning right up close to the glass. The next, they had leapt back with howls of horror. The glass in front of the boa constrictor tank vanishes, but neither Piers or Dudley fall into the tank like Dudley does in the movie. Then the snake gets out, slithers away, and says thanks to Harry. And the biggest difference I can think for the better in the movie is that Dudley falls into the tank. And when the snake slithers away, the glass is back and Dudley is stuck behind it, and they don't know how he got there. I think it's a great addition to what happened in this scene in the book, and it's hilarious in the movie. I love it. Also, in the movie, Aunt Petunia's reaction to Dudley in the tank is amazing. I know she's a mother concerned about her son, and I just think it's a little bit over the top and it's just brilliant. In the book, Piers calms down enough to mention, Harry was talking to it, weren't you, Harry? Then Uncle Vernon is so angry when they get home. All he can manage to say is, go, cupboard, stay, no meals. Before he collapses on a chair and Aunt Petunia goes to get him a very large brandy. Maybe we should have Brandy watch. How many times is Brandy mentioned in this series? That's one. In the movie, the scene ends with Uncle Vernon grabbing Harry's hair and forcing him into the cupboard, asking what happened and saying, there's no such thing as magic, when Harry says he doesn't know it was like magic. Uncle Vernon then locks the door from the outside and slams the air vent shut. In the book, from then, Harry lays in his cupboard wishing he had a watch because he wants to sneak out to the kitchen and get some food, but he doesn't know when the Dursleys are asleep. He says, okay, I'm going to quote this whole thing again, so bear with me. Quote, he'd lived with the Dursleys almost 10 years. 10 miserable years, as long as he could remember, ever since he'd been a baby and his parents had died in that car crash. He couldn't remember being in the car when his parents had died. Sometimes, when he strained his memory during long hours in his cupboard, he came up with a strange vision, a blinding flash of green light and a burning pain in his forehead. This, he supposed, was the crash, though he couldn't imagine where all the green light came from. He couldn't remember his parents at all. His aunt and uncle never spoke about them, and of course, he was forbidden to ask questions. There were no photographs in the house of them. It also says when Harry was younger, he dreamed about an unknown relative coming to take him away, and I think that's great foreshadowing of Sirius in 2 books' time. Then the book mentions something we don't really see until Hagrid and Harry walk into the leaky cauldron in the movie. And that is sometimes he thought or maybe hopes that strangers in the street seem to know him. Quote, very strange strangers they were too. A tiny man with a violet top hat that bowed to him once while out shopping. A wild looking old woman dressed all in green had waved merrily at him on a bus. A bald man with a very long purple coat had actually shaken his hand on the street. The weirdest thing about all these people was the way they seemed to vanish the second Harry tried to get a closer look. It's just really sad because at school, Harry had no one. Everyone knows that Dudley's gang hates him and they know not to mess with Dudley's gang. So he really does have no one, which I think is incredibly sad at Harry's age. He's only 10. It's something that could have been worked on more in the movie, I think. I think the pace of the start of the movie just tries to move too quickly and get us to Hogwarts. It just goes bang, 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 bang to the next. And we don't have the time to sit in it like we do in the book. And I wonder if they relied too much on people having read the book and then watching the movie when it first came out. And I think that's a very, very silly thing to do. Looking back at the time, you know the book had only been out about 4 years before the movie came out. So what, about 2 years before it was optioned to be made into a movie, and I just feel it was made for people who had read the books to already know a bit of this background stuff, and I think that is a wrong way of going about making an adaptation. Of course, the people who've read the books are going to buy into the movie and go see it and all that kind of stuff, but you want to invite new people in, and Harry Potter is such a large universe and world and fandom that of course people are always going to go and watch it who have not read the books. And I just think in any adaptation you need to come from it from the point of view of people watching your adaptation have not read the books. They are new to this thing, to this world, and I think that's where a lot of adaptations might get into a little bit of trouble, that they forget not everyone has read the source material. Anyway, that's a bit of waffling, but that's the end of chapter 2. And I just want to end this section by saying I love the symmetry in both the book and the movie of how Aunt Petunia unlocks the door at the start and Uncle Vernon locks it at the end. It transitions to the next scene around 8 minutes 30 seconds. And now we shall move on to chapter 3, which is The Letters from No One. Letters from No One opens with Harry telling us he'd had the longest punishment of his life because of the boa constrictor, and by the time it was over, the summer holidays had begun. He spends much of the summer trying to avoid Dudley and his gang, and he looks forward to going to secondary school so he won't be around them anymore. Dudley and Piers are going to Uncle Vernon's old private school, Smeltings, and Harry is going to the local comprehensive, Stonewall High. Dudley gets his Smeltings uniform, which includes a knobbly stick, hereafter called the Smeltings stick. Harry's uniform is hand-me-downs from Dudley, which Aunt Petunia is dyeing grey in the kitchen. In the movie, an owl drops one letter into the letterbox. Harry goes to collect it. In the book, it's the next day, and the letterbox clicks, and there are 3 things on the doormat: a postcard from Uncle Vernon's sister Marge, a large envelope that looked like a bill, and a letter for Harry. It's addressed to Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. The letter is described as, quote, thick and heavy, made of yellowish parchment, and the address was written in emerald green ink. There was no stamp. Turning the envelope over, his hand trembling, Harry saw a purple wax seal bearing a coat of arms, a lion, an eagle, a badger, and a snake surrounding a large letter H. In the movie, the attention to detail here is spot on. The three things Harry picks up from the letterbox are a postcard, a bill, and a letter addressed to him. As Harry walks into the kitchen, we see Aunt Petunia dyeing what will be Harry's new school uniform on the stove in the background. As in the movie, Dudley makes Uncle Vernon aware that Harry has a letter. In the book, Uncle Vernon snatches it from Harry, but in the movie, Dudley snatches it from Harry and gives it to Uncle Vernon. Side note, nice detail also with the sellotape. Look, I'm from Australia, so I'm going to call it sticky tape from now on. Nice detail with the sticky tape on Harry's glasses, too. In the movie, we don't see what Uncle Vernon does with this letter. In the book, when he sees what it is, his face, quote, went from red to green faster than a set of traffic lights, and it didn't stop there. Within seconds, it was the greyish white of old porridge. Aunt Petunia takes the letter and after reading the first line looked like she wanted to faint. She clutched her throat and made a choking noise. So Vernon kicks both Harry and Dudley out of the kitchen and slams the door. Quote, Harry and Dudley promptly had a furious but silent fight over who would listen at the keyhole. Dudley won, so Harry, his glasses dangling from one ear, lay flat on his stomach to listen at the crack between the door and floor. That silent fight is something I would have loved to see in the movie. Dudley, not used to being kicked out, the frantic scrambling for the keyhole position, and the tidbits of information they hear would have been useful to know as a viewer. And in my head, I picture it as similar to Harry and Ron fighting over the potions book in Half Blood Prince. That neither of them want to get the old tatty one. And I just picture a similar thing to that. So they hear them talk about being spied on, and Aunt Petunia suggests writing back, but Uncle Vernon says they will just ignore it. And when Aunt Petunia goes to object, he shouts, I'm not having one in the house, Petunia. Didn't we swear when we took him in we'd stamp out that dangerous nonsense? When Uncle Vernon gets back from work that night, he visits Harry in his cupboard and says, quote, about this cupboard. Your aunt and I have been thinking. You're really getting a bit big for it. We think it might be nice if you moved into Dudley's second bedroom. This doesn't happen in the movie. In the second movie, we see Harry in the bedroom and not under the stairs, but just going by watching the movie, you don't know the reason why he's there. Question. Do you think it's guilt that prompted them to do this? Someone knows Harry lived under the stairs. Are they paranoid they are being watched? They clearly don't care enough about Harry to change too much about how they treat him. They just give him the bedroom. So Harry moves into Dudley's second room, much to Dudley's distress. This bedroom is where Dudley stores all his broken things. The next morning at breakfast, all is quiet. Nothing Dudley did changed their minds, and when the post arrives, there's a letter for Harry. Mr. H. Potter, the smallest bedroom, 4 Privet Drive. Uncle Vernon roars and runs out of the hallway, followed closely by Harry, and there's a wrestling match between them to get the letter. Uncle Vernon wins and he sends Harry to his cupboard. Oops, he means bedroom. But Harry has a plan. He's repaired Dudley's broken alarm clock, and the next morning it wakes him at 6 a.m. He quickly turns it off and dresses silently and starts creeping down the stairs. He's going to wait for the postman on the corner and intercept him, but he falls over Uncle Vernon, who had slept in a sleeping bag in front of the front door, anticipating Harry would try this. In the movie, an owl delivers another letter and joins 2 other owls perched on the antenna on top of the house. Uncle Vernon rips up that letter. In the book that day, 3 letters arrived for Harry, and he watches as Uncle Vernon tears them to pieces. Uncle Vernon then nails up the letterbox, and he does this in the movie also. In the movie, the next day, Uncle Vernon is saying goodbye to Aunt Petunia as he heads off to work, and there were owls on his car and 5 letters on the ground, all addressed to Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, 4 Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. Proof, in the movie, the Dursleys haven't given him the second bedroom yet. In the book, next time, no fewer than 12 letters arrive, and as they can't go through the letterbox, they are shoved under the door, slotted through the sides, and even a few forced through the small window in the downstairs toilet. Uncle Vernon burns all those letters and nails up the cracks around the front and back doors, and no one can get out of the house. In the movie, Uncle Vernon burns those letters in the fireplace in front of Harry. In the book, the next day, 24 letters were delivered, quote, rolled up and hidden inside each of the 2 dozen eggs that their very confused milkman had handed to Aunt Petunia. And she shreds the letters in her food processor. Now, I would have loved to see in the movie the eggs look normal, but have a scene where Aunt Petunia cracks them and the letter bursts out and sizzles in a pan like some bacon. In the movie, on the Sunday, Uncle Vernon is happy there's no post on Sundays. Harry sees an owl fly past the window, looks out, and then we see him in the window from across the street with the roof, the lawn, the fence, and the car all covered by owls. A letter comes out the fireplace and whizzes by Uncle Vernon. There's a rumble, and hundreds of letters fly into the room from the fireplace, and it would have been such a fun scene to film, I think. In the book, the letters come shooting out of the fireplace, about 30 or 40 of them. Harry leaps trying to catch one, but Uncle Vernon captures Harry and tells them all to pack their bags. In the movie, Harry manages to grab a letter and runs to his cupboard, but Uncle Vernon chases him, catches him, and then letters flick through the letterbox like it's one of those handheld money dispenser things. Uncle Vernon declares, "That's it! We're going away, far away, where they can't find us." Dudley says, "Daddy's gone mad, hasn't he?" What follows in the book would have been a hilarious montage in the movie of Vernon driving them all around, very paranoid, making sharp turns and driving the opposite direction for a while, channeling his inner Taylor Swift, muttering, "Shake 'em off, shake 'em off." They didn't stop driving all day. Dudley's crying and howling because he never had such a bad day, and they stop at a gloomy looking hotel on the outskirts of a big city. Harry and Dudley share a room. And the next day, they're at breakfast when a hotel clerk comes up to them asking, "Is one of you Mr. H. Potter?" She holds up a letter addressed to Mr. H. Potter, Room 17, Railview Hotel, Cokeworth. Harry tries to grab the letter, but Uncle Vernon knocks his hand out of the way, and Uncle Vernon says he'll take them. Apparently, there's about 100 letters at reception for Mr. H. Porter. So they're driving around, and Uncle Vernon he's in a state like crazy and is looking around, trying to figure out where they can go, stopping every now and then, looking around to see if anyone's following them. And this is where in the book Dudley says, "Daddy's gone mad, hasn't he?" It's Monday, Dudley says, and it reminds Harry that it's his birthday on Tuesday. He'll be 11. Uncle Vernon disappears for a while and comes back smiling and holding, quote, a long, thin package, and didn't answer Aunt Petunia when she asked what he'd brought. He says he found the perfect place. It's raining, and Uncle Vernon points to a large rock at sea. Perched on the rock is, quote, the most miserable little shack you can imagine. Uncle Vernon says there's a storm forecast tonight, and an old man drops them off in a boat. Inside the shack, it smells of seaweed, and the wind whistles through the gaps, and it's very much like what you see in the movie. Just imagine the smell of seaweed and the wind whistling and it being cold. He tries to start a fire, but nothing happens, and he jokes, "We could do with some of those letters now, hey?" He's in a good mood because he thinks he's outsmarted the owl post and nobody is going to reach them there, and Harry kind of agrees. In the movie, it cuts from the hallway scene to a rocky little island with a tall, narrow structure on it that kind of reminds me a bit of the Burrow. There's stormy seas, dark sky, thunder, lightning, and waves crashing, and you just know that it's cold and miserable. In the book, night falls, and Harry watches Dudley's watch count down from 10 minutes to midnight because at midnight, it's his birthday. As the minutes go by, he starts hearing things outside and kind of a little bit in the movie, like in the movie, but in the book, at 1 minute to go, quote, 1 minute to go, he'd be 11, 30 seconds, 20, 10, 9. Maybe he'd wake Dudley up just to annoy him. 3, 2, 1. Boom! The whole shack shivered, and Harry sat bolt upright staring at the door. Someone was outside knocking to come in. which is good, but I think they did it a little bit better in the movie. Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia are in bed asleep upstairs, and the camera pans down to Dudley asleep on the couch and Harry in front of the fire on the floor. He's drawing his birthday cake in the dirt, and he looks at Dudley's watch and it beeps midnight. Harry tells himself to make a wish, blows out the candles on his dirt cake. Immediately, there's a boom at the door in front of him, and Dudley bolts upright on the couch. And this ends the section of this podcast at 12 minutes and 53 seconds of the movie. So far, so good. There are a couple of good scenes I think would have been great to see in the movie. I noticed there's just a lot of little stuff Harry sees and overhears in the book that we don't get in the movie. And maybe this is why movie Harry comes across not quite as smart as book Harry, to me anyway. It's like they took all the smart stuff from book Harry and book Ron and put it into movie Hermione because, well, we can't have more than one smart person, can we? I also think they did a great disservice by aging up Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia. Aunt Petunia is only a couple of years older than Lily, right? So Lily and James are around 21 years old. So I think aging them all up as they did just takes away some of the impact the books have when you think over the entire story. Think about what you were doing when you were around 21. Think about fighting in this wizarding war at that age and being hunted by the most evil wizard of the day. Think about the story finishing for Harry when he was 17, only 4 years younger than his parents when they died. It just has so much more impact knowing that they lived such short lives, and aging them up removes a bit of that gut punch, a bit of the impact. I also think with changing how Harry, Dudley, and Aunt Petunia look is sloppy. They should have dyed Daniel Radcliffe's hair and they should have left Aunt Petunia and Dudley as blondes. I get the eye color with Daniel, but come on with the hair color. Let's take a well deserved break and I'll be back to wrap this all up. As I was typing up these notes, I realized when thinking about the movie, we learn as Harry learns. We don't know about Voldemort, we don't know about his parents, and we don't know about how the Dursleys feel about the Potters because Harry doesn't know. And I'm not sure how I feel about that just yet. I know I don't like how rushed the start of the movie feels. As I said, like they just want to get to Hogwarts and the magic, which I get, but character backstory is key. And to leave out as much as they have, I just don't like. I do like a couple of scenes they did add, like Dudley falling into the boa constrictor tank and getting stuck behind the glass. And I like a couple of the small attention to detail pieces, like Dudley's new bike for his birthday and the amount of letters Harry first collects from the letterbox and Petunia dyeing his new uniform. This is a part of the podcast I'm naming after one of my cats. She is with me whenever I'm sitting at my computer and even has an old laptop of mine and an old microphone to stand in front of as she looks out the window. Pixie is 7 years old and came across to London with me from Australia, and she is named after the Cornish pixies in Chamber of Secrets. This segment is called Pixie's Pinion. Pixie has a lot to say about adapting books into films and believes when a book is optioned to be made into a film or TV series, it should be mandatory for the producers and writers to bring together a focus group of the fandom and discuss what are necessary scenes or parts of the book that need to be included. I agree with Pixie. If we'd had this before the Half Blood Prince came out, we'd know about Tom Riddle's family. We'd also know about the Marauders. We'd know who the Half Blood Prince is in the movie. And we'd know so many things that we just don't. And what are your thoughts on this? This segment of the podcast I've named after my other cat, Arya. She is 17 years old and also made the sojourn from Australia. Arya sleeps most of the day and only really gets up to eat. And she's named after the elf in the Aragon series of books. This is Arya Asks, and she wants to hear from you. Today, Arya asks a couple of questions. Firstly, what parts of this section of the book did you relate to? Personally, I related quite a lot to Harry being so alone. I had friends in primary school and high school, but I always felt like I was on the outside, and there's only really been a handful of people who I feel have allowed me to be my quirky self without judgment. Second question, what parts from these chapters of the book should have been included in the film? I mentioned the first part of chapter one where Uncle Vernon goes about his day and notices strange people and activities that should definitely have been in the movie, and the montage scene of them driving around in the car. And thirdly, Aria asks, what shall we call you, dear listeners, as a collective group? I suggest novellas, but let me know your suggestions in the comments and I'll post a poll. Well, that's all for today. Thank you so much for tuning into this first episode. I'm so happy to have the first one done and in the bag. And I'll be back next week with chapters 4 to 6. That is The Keeper of the Keys, Diagon Alley, and The Journey from Platform 9 3/4. Quick reminder again of how you can support this podcast. Please rate and review. This is only on Spotify at the moment. I'm trying to figure out how to get it on all the other platforms, so please bear with me. And please also follow along on Instagram at A Novel Take Podcast. Take care, everyone. And until next time, I'm Tracey, and may your favorite part of a book always make it into the adaptation. I am an Aussie Brit half breed, so Umbridge would hate me. But there are so there will okay, start that again. Sorry. I'm cracking myself up.